Welcome to the Ghastly Journal. Tonight I want to tell you about a small town called Blackwood Hollow and the woman whose words would forever alter its fate. The gravel crunched beneath my tires as I drove down the winding road toward Blackwood Hollow. The dense forest that surrounded the town seemed to grow more oppressive with each passing mile, the branches reaching over the road like gnarled fingers trying to pluck my car from the pavement. It was late September, and the leaves had just begun to turn, painting the landscape in hues of burnt orange and deep crimson. The perfect backdrop for what I was about to discover. I'm a journalist by trade, specializing in small-town histories and the secrets they hold. When my editor assigned me to cover the strange events unfolding in Blackwood Hollow, I thought it would be like any other assignment: interview a few locals, piece together a narrative, and be on my way. I couldn't have been more wrong. My first glimpse of Blackwood Hollow came as I crested a hill. The town lay nestled in a valley, a cluster of Victorian and colonial-style buildings surrounded by dense woodland. At its center stood a magnificent mansion on a hill, its windows dark and unwelcoming. Even from a distance, I could tell it was old money, the kind of place that had seen generations come and go, each leaving their mark on its walls. That was Lenley Manor, home to the town's founding family and the last living Lenley, Evangeline, age 93. I checked into the Blackwood Inn, a quaint establishment run by a woman named Martha Reynolds. As she handed me my key, her eyes narrowed. "You're here about Evangeline Lenley, aren't you?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I nodded. "I understand she's made some kind of confession." Martha's hand trembled slightly as she released the key. "We don't talk about that here. Not inside the walls in this town. They listen." It was an odd thing to say, but I'd heard stranger things in my line of work. I thanked her and headed to my room, eager to unpack and begin my investigation. The room was small but comfortable, with floral wallpaper and a window overlooking the town square. From my vantage point, I could see Lenley Manor looming over the town like a sentinel. The sun was setting behind it, casting long shadows across the square. For a brief moment, I thought I saw a figure standing at one of the mansion's windows watching me. But when I blinked, there was nothing there. I spent that first evening in the local tavern, the Crow's Nest, hoping to glean some information from the locals. The place fell silent when I entered, eyes following me as I made my way to the bar. The bartender, a burly man with a thick beard, eyed me suspiciously. "What can I get you, stranger?" he asked, his voice gruff. "Whatever's on tap," I replied, sliding onto a bar stool. "And maybe some information about Evangeline Lenley." The tavern, which had begun to resume its low hum of conversation, fell silent once more. The bartender's expression hardened. "We don't talk about the Lenleys here," he said firmly, sliding a pint of amber liquid toward me. "Especially not after what happened last month." I took a sip of my beer, letting the bitter taste linger before speaking again. "I'm just trying to understand what's going on in this town. I heard Evangeline made some kind of confession." A woman sitting a few stools down from me leaned in. She was in her 60s, with silver hair and eyes that had seen too much. "You want to know about the Lenleys?" she asked, her voice raspy from years of cigarettes. "I'll tell you, but not here. Meet me at the cemetery tomorrow at noon. I'll be visiting my husband's grave." Before I could ask her name, she dropped some money on the bar and left, the door swinging shut behind her. The bartender shook his head. "That's Eleanor Blackwood. She's lived here her whole life. If anyone knows the truth about the Lenleys, it's her." Blackwood, like the town. Her family founded this place alongside the Lenleys. The two families were once inseparable. Now Eleanor's the last of her line, just like Evangeline is the last of hers. I spent the rest of the evening nursing my beer and observing the locals. They spoke in hushed tones, occasionally glancing in my direction. It was clear that whatever Evangeline Lenley had confessed to had shaken this town to its core. The next morning dawned gray and misty, the perfect atmosphere for a meeting in a cemetery. I found Eleanor exactly where she said she'd be, standing before a well-maintained gravestone. The name Richard Blackwood was etched into the marble, along with the dates 1950-2020. "My husband," Eleanor said without turning around. "He always said the Lenleys would be the death of this town. Turns out he was right." She finally turned to face me, her eyes red-rimmed from crying or lack of sleep, possibly both. "You want to know about Evangeline's confession?" she stated matter-of-factly. I nodded. "First, you need to understand the history of Blackwood Hollow. This town was founded in 1843 by two families, the Blackwoods and the Lenleys. They were business partners, friends, some say more than friends. They built this town from nothing, established the lumber mill, the mines, everything that gave this place life." Eleanor began to walk, and I fell into step beside her. The cemetery was vast, with headstones dating back to the town's founding. "The Lenleys have always been different," she continued. "They had a way with people, a charisma that bordered on something else. People in town would do anything for them, give them anything they wanted. My grandfather called it the Lenley charm, but my grandmother had another name for it, the Lenley curse." We stopped before an imposing mausoleum, the name Lenley carved into the stone above the entrance. The door was iron, adorned with intricate symbols I didn't recognize. Every generation, the Lenleys choose one woman to lead the family. They call her the matriarch. She makes all the decisions, controls all the wealth, determines the family's future. Evangeline has been the matriarch for over 60 years now. "Why a woman?" I asked. Eleanor's smile was bitter. "The Lenleys believe women are more attuned to certain energies. That's all Evangeline would tell me when we were girls. We used to be friends, you know, before everything happened." "What changed?" "Life, choices, the weight of our family legacies." Eleanor sighed deeply. "Evangeline married my brother Thomas. They had a son, but both Thomas and the baby died under mysterious circumstances. The official report said it was carbon monoxide poisoning, but there was talk." "What kind of talk?" "That Evangeline had sacrificed them. For power, for longevity. The Lenley matriarchs always live unnaturally long lives. Evangeline's mother lived to be 105. Her grandmother, 112. I tried not to show my skepticism. Small towns often bred superstition, and it seemed Blackwood Hollow was no exception. "And Evangeline's confession? What did she say?" Eleanor's expression grew grave. 2 months ago, Evangeline called a town meeting. Everyone attended. You don't ignore a summons from a Lenley, especially not the matriarch. She stood before us, this frail woman who once commanded the room with her presence, and she confessed to making a deal with something that lives in the woods, a deal that has kept this town prosperous but at a terrible cost. What kind of deal? What cost? Every 50 years, the matriarch must provide a sacrifice, a life freely given, someone who loves the matriarch completely. In exchange, the town thrives, and the Lenley family continues. Evangeline confessed to sacrificing my brother all those years ago, and their son. I struggled to keep my expression neutral. This sounded like the ramblings of a woman whose mind was failing her. And people believed her? Eleanor's eyes flashed with anger. You didn't see her, the way she spoke, the certainty in her voice. And then there's the evidence. Evidence? After her confession, people started looking into the town's history. Every 50 years, like clockwork, someone close to the Lenley matriarch dies unexpectedly. And each time, the town experiences a boom. New businesses open, the mines yield more ore, the forests grow back faster than they should. She led me to another grave, this one simple and unadorned. My brother Thomas. Evangeline said he volunteered, that he understood the importance of the sacrifice. She said he drank the poison willingly while their baby slept in the next room. And then she gave the baby the same poison. Eleanor's voice broke. She said she couldn't bear to separate them, that Thomas wanted his son with him in whatever came next. I didn't know what to say. It was a horrific accusation, one that should have landed Evangeline in jail. Why hasn't she been arrested? If she confessed to murder, there's no evidence, not after all these years. And Evangeline retracted her confession the next day, claimed she was confused, that her mind was slipping. The town is divided. Those who believe her original confession, and those who think she's just a senile old woman. Which do you believe? Eleanor's eyes met mine. and I saw the weight of decades of suspicion and grief. I believe the Lenleys have always had a darkness in them, and I believe my brother would never willingly leave me or this world. He had too much to live for. She glanced at her watch. I have to go. But if you want to understand what's happening in Blackwood Hollow, you need to speak with Evangeline herself. She doesn't receive many visitors these days, but she might make an exception for a journalist. Tell her Eleanor sent you. With that, she walked away, leaving me alone among the dead with more questions than answers. That afternoon, I drove up the winding road to Lenley Manor. Up close, the mansion was even more impressive. A 3-story Victorian with turrets and gables, surrounded by immaculately maintained gardens. Despite its grandeur, there was something oppressive about the place, as if the very air around it was heavier. I knocked on the massive oak door, expecting a butler or housekeeper to answer. Instead, the door swung open to reveal a young woman in her 20s, with dark hair and striking blue eyes. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice pleasant but wary. "I'm here to see Evangeline Lenley. Eleanor Blackwood suggested I speak with her." The young woman's eyebrows rose slightly. "Eleanor sent you? That's unexpected. I'm Rebecca Harris, Evangeline's caretaker. Come in. I'll see if she's receiving visitors today." I stepped into a grand foyer with a sweeping staircase and crystal chandelier. The interior of the mansion was as impressive as its exterior, though there was a mustiness to the air, as if the place hadn't been properly aired out in years. Rebecca led me to a sitting room and gestured for me to wait. "I'll let Mrs. Lenley know you're here. Would you like some tea?" I accepted, and she disappeared through a door at the far end of the room. Left alone, I took the opportunity to examine my surroundings. The sitting room was filled with antiques, a grandfather clock that no longer ticked, porcelain figurines gathering dust on shelves, oil paintings of stern-faced men and women who I assumed were Lenley ancestors. One painting caught my attention, a portrait of a woman who bore a striking resemblance to Rebecca. The plaque beneath it read, "Josephine Lenley, Matriarch, 1843-1910. Rebecca returned with a tea tray. "Mrs. Lenley will see you now. She's having one of her good days, but please keep your visit brief. She tires easily." I followed Rebecca through a maze of corridors until we reached a sunroom at the back of the house. Seated in a high-backed chair by the window was Evangeline Lenley. Despite being 93, Evangeline had a presence that filled the room. Her back was straight, her white hair impeccably styled, her hands resting on the arms of her chair like a queen on her throne. Her eyes, the same striking blue as those in the portraits, fixed on me with an intensity that was unsettling. "So," she said, her voice stronger than I expected, "Eleanor has sent a journalist to me. How very like her to try to force my hand." Rebecca set the tea tray on a small table beside Evangeline. "Call if you need anything, Mrs. Lenley," she said before leaving us alone. Evangeline gestured to a chair opposite her. "Sit. Tell me why you're really here." I took a seat, feeling as though I was being examined under a microscope. "I'm researching the history of Blackwood Hollow, and I've heard that recent events have caused quite a stir in town." "You mean my supposed confession?" Evangeline said bluntly. "The ravings of a senile old woman, or so they say now." "And what do you say?" Evangeline's lips curved into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I say that truth is a dangerous thing in a town like this. People prefer their comfortable lies." She poured tea with steady hands, offering me a cup. "Sugar? Milk?" "Just as it is, thank you." Evangeline nodded approvingly. "A purist. I appreciate that. Now ask your questions. I know you have them." I took a sip of tea, gathering my thoughts. "Did you confess to sacrificing your husband and son?" "Yes." The directness of her answer surprised me. "I did, and every word was true." "Then why retract your confession?" Evangeline's gaze drifted to the window, to the woods beyond the manicured lawn. "Because I realized it wasn't my secret to tell. The arrangement between the Lenleys and what dwells in those woods has sustained this town for generations. Who am I to break that covenant in my final years?" I tried to keep my expression neutral. "What exactly dwells in the woods, Mrs. Lenley?" Her eyes snapped back to me, sharp and clear. "Something old, something patient. Something that was here long before the first settlers arrived and will be here long after the last human is gone. And this entity requires sacrifices. All gods do in their way. Ours just has more specific tastes. I set my teacup down, the porcelain clinking against the saucer. Mrs. Lenley, with all due respect, this sounds insane. She laughed, a sound like dry leaves rustling. Of course it does. That's why I retracted my confession. Who would believe an old woman claiming to have made deals with forest gods? Better they think me confused than confront the truth of what has kept Blackwood Hollow prosperous all these years. If what you're saying is true, why confess at all? Evangeline's expression softened, showing vulnerability for the first time. Because I am the last. There is no daughter, no niece, no female relative to take my place as matriarch. When I die, the covenant dies with me. I thought the town deserved to know what's coming. And what is coming, Mrs. Lenley? She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper. Hunger. The entity in the woods has been fed regularly for almost 200 years. What do you think happens when such a thing is suddenly starved? A chill ran down my spine despite the warmth of the sunroom. You're saying that without a matriarch, without these sacrifices, something bad will happen to Blackwood Hollow. I'm saying that deals have consequences, especially when broken. The people of this town have enjoyed prosperity born of blood. Soon they'll learn the true cost. Before I could ask another question, the door opened and Rebecca returned. Mrs. Lenley needs to rest now, she said firmly. Evangeline didn't protest, which suggested to me that our conversation had tired her more than she let on. Visit the library, she said, as Rebecca helped her from her chair. Ask for the town records from 1843. Read about the founding of Blackwood Hollow. Then you'll understand. I thanked her for her time and left the manor, my mind reeling. Part of me wanted to dismiss Evangeline's claims as the delusions of an elderly woman, but there had been such conviction in her eyes, such certainty in her voice. The Blackwood Hollow Public Library was housed in a beautiful Greek Revival building on the town square. The librarian, a middle-aged woman named Helen Porter, eyed me suspiciously when I requested the town records from 1843. Research, I explained. I'm writing about the founding of the town. Helen's lips pressed into a thin line. Those records aren't typically available to the public. They're fragile and need special handling. Evangeline Lenley suggested I look at them. At the mention of Evangeline's name, Helen's demeanor changed. I see. Well, in that case, follow me. She led me to a room at the back of the library, unlocking the door with a key she wore around her neck. Inside was a small archive, the walls lined with shelves of leather-bound books and documents in acid-free boxes. The founding records are here, Helen said, pulling a large leather-bound book from a shelf. Please use these gloves when handling it, and don't remove anything from this room. She placed the book on a table and handed me a pair of white cotton gloves before leaving me alone with the records. The book was a journal, the first entry dated April 15, 1843. The handwriting was elegant but difficult to read, the ink faded with age. The author identified herself as Josephine Lenley, wife of Edmund Lenley and mother to his 3 children. As I read, a disturbing narrative emerged. Josephine wrote of the harsh winter of 1842-43, how their expedition had become lost in the mountains, how food had run out, how they had resorted to desperate measures to survive. She described finding the valley that would become Blackwood Hollow, how it seemed too good to be true. Fertile soil, abundant game, timber, and what appeared to be rich veins of silver in the nearby mountains. But the valley wasn't unoccupied. Josephine wrote of encounters with something ancient that walks between the trees, of strange symbols carved into the oldest oaks, of offerings left at the forest's edge by indigenous peoples long before the Lenleys arrived. Then came the entry that made my blood run cold, May 10th, 1843. Edmund and Richard Blackwood insist we can build here, that this valley is perfect for our settlement. They dismiss my concerns about the forest entity as superstition. Last night it came to me in a dream. It showed me what would happen if we stayed. Prosperity beyond imagination, but at a price. It requires acknowledgement, sacrifice, a covenant passed from mother to daughter, keeper to keeper. I have agreed to its terms. May God forgive me for what I must do. The next several entries detailed the rapid construction of the settlement, the miraculous discovery of a silver vein richer than anyone had anticipated, the inexplicable fertility of the soil that yielded crops in half the expected time. And then, July 3rd, 1843, it is done. Edmund discovered my arrangement with the forest entity. He was furious, threatened to expose me to the others. I explained that his anger was misplaced, that what I had done was for our future, for our children. He wouldn't listen. The entity gave me no choice. It required a first sacrifice to seal our covenant. Edmund's blood has nourished the soil of our new home. I told the others he was attacked by a bear while hunting. They believed me. Richard suspects something, but he will not speak against me. Not now that I carry the power of the covenant. I sat back, my heart pounding. Josephine Lenley had murdered her husband and passed it off as an accident, the first sacrifice to whatever entity dwelled in the forest. The journal continued, detailing the growth of the settlement, the births and deaths of townsfolk, the increasing influence of the Lenley family. Josephine wrote of teaching her eldest daughter, Margaret, about the covenant, preparing her to become the next matriarch. The final entry was dated December 31st, 1859. The time approaches for the next great sacrifice. The entity grows hungry. Margaret understands her duty as the next matriarch. She has chosen Richard Blackwood's youngest son, despite her affection for him. The covenant must be maintained. The town must prosper. This will be my final entry. I pass the responsibility to Margaret now, along with this journal. May she guard our secret well. I closed the book, my hands trembling despite the gloves. If the journal was to be believed, the Lenley women had been sacrificing people to some forest entity for nearly 200 years, approximately once every 50 years, just as Eleanor had said. But was any of it real? Or was this an elaborate family delusion, passed down through generations of Lenley women? I spent the next few days interviewing townspeople, reviewing historical records, and trying to separate fact from fiction. The town's history did indeed show unusual prosperity punctuated by unexplained deaths, approximately every 50 years. Thomas Blackwood and his infant son had died in 1973, which would align with the pattern. On my fourth night in Blackwood Hollow, I was awakened by a knock at my door. It was well past midnight, and I was immediately on alert. I approached the door cautiously. "Who is it?" I called. "Rebecca Harris," came the reply. "Evangeline's caretaker. Please, I need to speak with you." I opened the door to find Rebecca looking distressed, her hair disheveled as if she'd been running her hands through it repeatedly. "May I come in?" she asked, glancing nervously down the hallway. I stepped aside to let her enter, then closed and locked the door behind her. "What's wrong?" "Evangeline is dying," Rebecca said without preamble. "The doctor gives her a few days at most. She's asking for you." "Me? Why?" Rebecca paced the small room, her agitation palpable. "She says you need to understand before it's too late. She wants to show you something." "Show me what?" "I don't know. But she's insistent. And when Evangeline gets like this, it's better to just do as she asks." I checked my watch. It was nearly 1 a.m. "Can't this wait until morning?" Rebecca shook her head emphatically. "No, it has to be now, tonight." There was something in her tone, an urgency that went beyond concern for her employer. I grabbed my jacket and followed her out of the inn. Rebecca's car was parked outside, an older model sedan that had seen better days. We drove in silence up the winding road to Lenley Manor. The mansion loomed even more ominously in the darkness, only a few windows illuminated. Rebecca led me through the quiet house to Evangeline's bedroom. The room was vast, dominated by a four-poster bed where the elderly woman lay propped up on pillows. Despite her frail condition, Evangeline's eyes were alert and focused as we entered. "You came," she said, her voice weaker than when I'd last heard it. "Good, we don't have much time." Rebecca moved to Evangeline's side, adjusting her pillows with practiced ease. "I'll leave you two alone," she said, but Evangeline grasped her wrist. "Stay. the old woman commanded. "You need to hear this too." Rebecca nodded and took a seat in a chair beside the bed. I remained standing, unsure of what was happening. "I've read Josephine's journal," I said, "about the founding of the town, the covenant with the forest entity." Evangeline nodded. "Then you know part of the truth, but not all of it." She gestured to a drawer in the bedside table. "Rebecca, give it to me." Rebecca opened the drawer and removed a small leather-bound book, which she handed to Evangeline. The old woman held it for a moment, running her fingers over the worn cover before offering it to me. "My journal," she explained. "I've kept it for over 70 years, just as every matriarch has since Josephine. Read the last entry." I took the journal and opened it to the final written page, dated just 3 days earlier. "I have made my decision. The covenant must end with me. There is no suitable heir, and even if there were, I could not in good conscience pass this burden to another. The sacrifices, the lies, the weight of it all, it ends now. The entity will be angry, it will be hungry. But perhaps without a matriarch to focus its attention, its influence will dissipate over time, or perhaps not. Either way, I cannot continue this legacy of blood. Rebecca suspects something is wrong. She's more perceptive than I gave her credit for. I see Josephine in her, though she doesn't know her true heritage. It's better that way. Let her live free of the covenant, of the responsibilities that have burdened the Lenley women for generations. Tomorrow I will show them both, Rebecca and the journalist, the heart of the covenant. They deserve to know what comes next." I looked up from the journal, my mind racing. What do you mean Rebecca doesn't know her true heritage? And what is the heart of the covenant? Evangeline's gaze shifted to Rebecca, who was watching her with a mixture of confusion and apprehension. "Tell her, Rebecca. Tell her your mother's name." Rebecca swallowed hard. "Sarah Harris." "And before she married David Harris?" A pause. "Sarah Lenley. She was your niece." Evangeline nodded. "The daughter of my younger brother Jonathan. I took her in after her parents died in that car accident. Raised her as my own until she met David Harris and fell in love. They moved away, had you, lived normal lives, until they died. And you came back to Blackwood Hollow to care for your great-aunt." Rebecca's face had gone pale. "You're saying I'm a Lenley? That I'm related to you by blood?" "You are more than that, child. You are the last female descendant of the Lenley line, the rightful next matriarch." The room fell silent as the implications of Evangeline's words sank in. Rebecca stood abruptly, backing away from the bed. "No," she said, shaking her head. "No, that's not possible. My mother never mentioned any of this. She would have told me." "She didn't know," Evangeline replied. "I made sure of it. I wanted at least one branch of our family to be free from the covenant. But now..." She gestured weakly at herself. "Now circumstances force my hand." "What does this have to do with me?" I asked, trying to bring the conversation back to why I had been summoned in the middle of the night. Evangeline's piercing blue eyes, the same shade as Rebecca's, I now realized, fixed on me. "You are a witness, an outsider, someone who can tell the truth if things go wrong." "Wrong how?" Instead of answering, Evangeline struggled to sit up. "Help me," she commanded. "We need to go to the woods." Rebecca and I exchanged concerned glances. "Mrs. Lenley, you're in no condition to leave this bed," Rebecca protested. "I will die in the next day or two regardless," Evangeline said matter-of-factly. "I would rather meet my end under the stars than in this mausoleum. Now help me up." Against my better judgment, I assisted Rebecca in getting Evangeline out of bed and into a wheelchair. We dressed her warmly. The September nights were getting cold, and Rebecca found a powerful flashlight for our journey. As we left the mansion, Evangeline directed us toward a path that led into the woods behind the property. The path was well maintained for the first 100 yards or so before becoming more rugged. Eventually, the wheelchair couldn't go any further. "I'll have to carry her," I said to Rebecca, who nodded gratefully. I lifted Evangeline from the wheelchair, surprised by how light she was, and followed her whispered directions deeper into the forest. Rebecca led the way with the flashlight, illuminating the path ahead. After about 20 minutes of walking, we reached a small clearing. In its center stood a circle of standing stones, each about 4 feet tall. They were rough-hewn and covered in moss, but even in the dim light, I could make out symbols carved into their surfaces. The same symbols I had seen on the iron door of the Lenley mausoleum. "Set me down in the center," Evangeline instructed. "Mrs. Lenley, I don't think—" "Do it," she said, her voice suddenly commanding, carrying the weight of decades of authority. "Please." I did as she asked, gently placing her on the ground in the center of the stone circle. Rebecca knelt beside her, concern etched on her face. "What is this place?" she asked. "The heart of the covenant," Evangeline replied. "The first matriarch, Josephine, found it when the Lenleys settled here. The indigenous people of this region knew of it, left offerings here. Josephine learned to communicate with the entity through this place." As if on cue, a wind picked up, rustling the leaves around us. It seemed to come from all directions at once, converging on the stone circle. "It knows I'm here," Evangeline said, a hint of satisfaction in her voice. "It knows what I intend." "Which is what, exactly?" I asked, growing increasingly uneasy. Evangeline reached into the pocket of her robe and pulled out a small vial of dark liquid. "To break the covenant, once and for all." Rebecca's eyes widened. "What is that?" "The same poison I gave Thomas and our son," Evangeline replied calmly. "Quick, painless. The entity prefers living sacrifices, but it will accept my death as the final payment, especially here, in its sacred space." "Mrs. Lenley, no!" Rebecca lunged forward, trying to take the vial, but Evangeline held it away from her. "You don't understand, child. This is the only way to end it. Otherwise, the hunger will grow, and it will demand a new matriarch. It will call to you, Rebecca, in your dreams, in your waking hours. It will not relent until you accept the covenant, or until it takes its due another way." "There has to be another solution," I said, trying to reason with her. "We can get help. Experts who study folklore, anthropologists." Evangeline laughed bitterly. "Do you think I haven't tried? For decades I've searched for a way to break the covenant without bloodshed. There is none. The entity requires blood, Lenley blood, to end what Lenley blood began." The wind had grown stronger, swirling around us like a vortex. The temperature seemed to drop suddenly, my breath visible in the air. "It's coming," Evangeline whispered, a mix of fear and resignation in her voice. "Rebecca, you must decide. Accept the mantle of matriarch and continue the covenant, or help me end it now with my death." Rebecca was shaking, tears streaming down her face. "I can't. I don't want either of those things. This is insane." "Insanity would be ignoring the truth before your eyes," Evangeline replied. "Look around you, child. Feel it. The entity is here." And indeed, something had changed in the clearing. The moonlight seemed different, filtered through something I couldn't quite see. The shadows between the trees deepened, shifted in ways that shadows shouldn't move. "What happens if the covenant ends?" I asked, my voice barely audible over the wind. "What happens to the town?" "And the prosperity ends," Evangeline said simply. "The unnatural good fortune that has sustained Blackwood Hollow for generations will cease. The mines will run dry, the forests will stop regenerating so quickly, crops will fail, but the sacrifices will end too. No more blood on Lenley hands." Rebecca was looking around wildly, her eyes wide with fear. "There's something here," she whispered. "I can feel it watching us." "It's always been watching," Evangeline said. "From the moment the first Lenleys set foot in this valley, waiting, hungry." She uncorked the vial, the action deliberate and unhurried. "This is my choice, my final act as matriarch." "Wait!" Rebecca cried out. "There has to be another way. Maybe I could become the matriarch but change the terms. Negotiate a new covenant." Evangeline paused, the vial inches from her lips. "That's not how it works, child. The entity doesn't negotiate, it demands." "But you negotiated once," I pointed out, desperately trying to stop what was happening. "Josephine made the original covenant. Surely it can be changed." A thoughtful expression crossed Evangeline's face. but the price would be steep. The entity doesn't give something for nothing. The wind suddenly died, leaving an eerie silence in the clearing. The moonlight seemed to concentrate on the stone circle, illuminating us in a pale glow. "It's listening," Evangeline whispered. "It's curious." Rebecca took a deep breath, visibly steadying herself. If I accept the role of matriarch, can I try to change the covenant? To find a way that doesn't require human sacrifice?" Evangeline's expression was grave. "You can try. But be warned, the entity is old and cunning. It may agree to your terms only to twist them later. And once you accept the mantle, you are bound to it for life." "How would I even do this?" Rebecca asked. "How does one become the matriarch?" "Blood recognizes blood," Evangeline replied. "Take my hands. If you truly wish to accept this burden, the transfer will happen naturally." Rebecca hesitated, looking from Evangeline to me and back again. "If I do this, will you promise not to take that poison? To let nature take its course?" Evangeline considered this for a moment, then nodded. "I promise. But know that when I die, the entity's full attention will turn to you. You will have to be strong." With trembling hands, Rebecca reached out and clasped Evangeline's wrinkled fingers in her own. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, a change came over both women. Evangeline seemed to diminish somehow, becoming smaller, frailer, as if something vital was leaving her. Rebecca, on the other hand, straightened, her eyes widening as if seeing something for the first time. "I can feel it," she whispered, her voice filled with wonder and terror. "The connection, the covenant, it's like a living thing inside me." Evangeline nodded weakly. "The burden passes to you now, the responsibility, the power. Use it wisely, Rebecca Lenley. Remember why you accepted it." I watched in stunned silence as Rebecca helped Evangeline to her feet. The old woman could barely stand, leaning heavily on her great niece. "Take me home," Evangeline said, her voice barely audible. "I've done what I came to do." The journey back to the mansion was slow and difficult. By the time we reached Evangeline's bedroom, the sky was beginning to lighten with the first hints of dawn. I helped Rebecca settle Evangeline into her bed, the old woman now seemingly on the very edge of life. "Stay," Evangeline whispered to me as Rebecca went to call the doctor. "There's something you need to know." I leaned closer to hear her fading voice. "I lied," she said, a ghost of a smile on her lips. "About Thomas and our son. I didn't sacrifice them. They really did die of carbon monoxide poisoning. An accident, a faulty heater. I loved them too much." "Then who was your sacrifice 50 years ago?" I asked, confused. "No one. I broke the covenant. I thought I could defy the entity, that my will was strong enough. I was wrong. The entity took its due anyway. 3 children disappeared from Blackwood Hollow that summer. Their bodies were never found. The entity was sending me a message. Defy the covenant and innocence pay the price." Horror washed over me as I realized the implications. "You're saying that if the covenant isn't maintained, the entity takes what it wants, indiscriminately, cruelly." Evangeline's eyes, now cloudy with approaching death, fixed on mine. "That's why I needed Rebecca to accept the mantle. She has a chance to find another way, to negotiate new terms. She's young, clever, stronger than I ever was. And my role in all this, why show me? Someone needs to tell the story, the truth, about the Lenleys, about Blackwood Hollow, about what lives in these woods." Her hand, cold and light as a bird's wing, grasped mine. "Promise me, whatever happens, tell the truth." I nodded, though I wasn't entirely sure what the truth was anymore. Evangeline Lenley died the next morning, slipping away peacefully in her sleep. The town mourned her passing with a grand funeral, the kind reserved for founding families and beloved community figures. I watched from a distance as they laid her to rest in the Lenley Mausoleum, noting the mixture of grief, respect, and something like relief on the faces of the townspeople. Rebecca approached me after the service, changed somehow from the young woman I had first met at Lenley Manor. There was a gravity to her now, a presence that commanded attention. "You're leaving," she said. It wasn't a question. "Tomorrow," I confirmed. "I've gathered enough for my article." "And what will you write?" I considered the question carefully. "The truth, as I understand it. That Evangeline Lenley was the last of a long line of remarkable women who shaped this town in ways few people understood. That her final confession was an attempt to come to terms with a family legacy, too complex for most to comprehend." Rebecca nodded slowly. "And the covenant? The entity in the woods? I'll present it as local folklore, a fascinating example of how small towns create narratives to explain their histories." I paused. "Unless you'd prefer I tell a different story?" A hint of a smile touched Rebecca's lips, reminding me suddenly of Evangeline. "No, that's probably for the best. Some truths aren't meant for the wider world." "What will you do now?" I asked. "Will you stay in Blackwood Hollow?" "I have to. This is my home now, my responsibility." Her blue eyes, those striking Lenley eyes, met mine. "I've been having conversations with the entity, testing boundaries, proposing alternatives. Any success?" "Some. It's willing to accept different kinds of sacrifices. Time, energy, devotion. Blood is still its preference, but not necessarily life. I'm learning its language, its desires. It's going to be a long process." I couldn't help but admire her determination, her courage in facing something I still couldn't fully comprehend. "If you ever need someone to talk to, someone who knows the truth." Rebecca reached into her pocket and handed me a business card with her phone number. "I may take you up on that someday. In the meantime, be careful what you write. Words have power, especially when they concern things like our friend in the woods." We parted with a handshake that felt significant somehow, as if we were sealing a pact of our own. As I drove out of Blackwood Hollow the next day, I glanced in my rearview mirror at the town receding behind me. Lenley Manor stood on its hill, watching over the valley as it had for generations. And beyond it, the ancient forest stretched into the distance, keeping its secrets close. I've written and rewritten this account several times since then, never quite satisfied with how to tell the story of Evangeline Lenley and her final confession. Is it a tale of an elderly woman's delusions, a family myth taken too seriously? Or is there something true at its core, something ancient and hungry that dwells in the woods around Blackwood Hollow? I don't know if I'll ever publish this version of events. Some stories, as Rebecca said, aren't meant for the wider world. But I made a promise to tell the truth, and this is the truth as I experienced it. As for Blackwood Hollow, I check the local news occasionally. The town seems to be thriving under the guidance of its newest resident, Rebecca Lenley Harris, who recently established a charitable foundation to preserve the town's forests and historical sites. The mining company reported an unexpected discovery of a new silver vein, ensuring employment for years to come. The lumber industry is booming, with sustainable practices allowing for faster regrowth than anyone anticipated. Sometimes I think about visiting again, to see how Rebecca is managing her role as the new matriarch, to ask her what price she's paying for the town's continued prosperity. But then I remember the feeling in that stone circle, the sense of something ancient and other watching from just beyond the edge of perception, and I decide to stay away. Some covenants once witnessed are better observed from a distance.